harder, faster. Boom, I'm going to the maximum. I'm going to the maximum. I'm going to the maximum.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christo Georgiev. Some of the people in the audience may know me from my role in the Web2 world as country manager and chief operations officer of FinScore. There is another role in my life as a 2-time bear market survivor from the crypto crashes and from the crypto markets over the course of the last couple of years. I first got introduced to the crypto world back in 2016, and I was immediately captivated by the way that this confluence of finance and technology has the opportunity to rectify some of the challenges that we've seen in the Web2 world and, broadly speaking, in our societies as well. As part of this, basically, we started thinking about what actually decentralized identity means. And there are several different aspects of it. On the one hand side, our identities, even today, are fairly decentralized in the sense that they are not sitting in one specific space. They are fairly well dispersed in multiple different ecosystems. In addition to that, however, the decentralized world, the way we interact with Web3 applications, the way we interact with the way we use our wallets, the type of digital assets that we are holding is another piece of our identity that is currently not captivated by the way we form our relations with both businesses as well as with other people online. So if we look at biology, the way identity is defined is by your genetics, your genetics imprint. But that's a fairly simplified view. In reality, our identity is so much more than our genetics, regardless of what companies like 23andMe or CircleDNA might tell you. Our identity is very much related to things that may be very well located in our pockets, such as our passport, such as our driver's license, such as the information that identifies us in the real world. And another piece of our identity can be also our social media profile, our hobbies and interests, our likes and dislikes, the type of people that we surround each other with, how we interact with this. All of this information in combination forms part of our digital identity. And so in that sense, identity is way more than biology. It's how others perceive you. And in the digital context and in the context of credit scoring, that's actually quite important because when we talk about credit scoring and how this relates to identity, these topics may not intuitively be co-linked or correlated together. However, credit scoring is very much about data, about accurately assessing data in order to price the risk level of the potential borrowers, of the people that financial institutions are going to lend money to. And this data boils down primarily to information. And this information is not random. It's information about the identities of their potential borrowers. So this identity nowadays is very, very well dispersed in multiple different ecosystems. It's around our social circle. It's around our purchasing decisions. It's around our online activity. It's around our hobbies and interests, the way we are being perceived by both others as well as by the type of companies or enterprises that we form relationships with. So all of this being said, very similar to the real world, how we interact with both Web2 applications and how we interact within Web3 ecosystems influences how our identity is perceived digitally. And this very much creates an impact on our credit score and on our credit eligibility and worthiness. All of this being said, in the traditional world, our credit scores are largely dependent or largely an end effect from the way we have interacted with the legacy financial system. This is typically credit bureaus and banks as part of the financial institutions that interact with credit bureaus look at traditional information such as how many loans has a certain person taken, how many credit cards we own, how long was our credit history, etc. But this is a very, very limiting view of our identity. In reality, there's other various pieces of our identity that are scattered around both alternative sources as well as around alternative digital economies with which in which we spend most of our times. FinScore in the Philippines has built one such solution that relies on essentially allowing borrowers to to transfer their reputation from the way they use their SIM cards, from the way they interact within the telecom ecosystem, and transfer this reputation into the way they form new relationships with financial institutions and with banks and others. But this is just one very, very simple example. In reality, the pieces of our identity and pieces of information about us are available in utility companies, they're available in the e-commerce platforms that we interact with, they're available in social media platforms that we interact with. They're available on our devices, on our phones. They're available on the way we use our Google search, our Twitter, our Netflix, our Spotify. All of these are identities that are currently not taken into consideration by financial institutions whenever they decide to underwrite borrowers' credit risk. In addition to that, and there is an additional layer which is how we interact with Web3 applications, what kind of digital assets we store, how many transactions we've made historically, do we buy NFTs or not, what kind of decentralized applications are we using at the moment. None of this information is currently stitched together with the very same person that actually exists in the real world and has a passport, or with the very same person that exists on Facebook, on Instagram, or in any other applications. And that's a fairly big shortcoming of the traditional financial system, and it's one of the main reasons why, at the moment, centralized financial applications and decentralized financial applications exist in parallel with very, very limited touch bases. But our argument and our thesis is that this is going to change. It's already changing, and in the very near future, there's going to be more and more overlaps between the different ecosystems that exist out there. There's millions of Filipinos that currently earn their income outside of the traditional world or outside of the traditional economy. They earn it by being gig workers, for example, on platforms such as Upwork or Fiverr. And all of the information that is gathered there is actually equally as valuable as income that is being generated by working in a BPO, for example. There's companies in the Philippines that already allow individuals to use this as part of the information that is going to allow to form their identity whenever they form relationships with financial institutions, but that's not the only possibility. There's over 10 million holders of Ronin wallets in the Philippines. Over 10 million Filipinos have interacted with the Axie Infinity ecosystem, which is basically what, maybe 10% of the population of the country. It's a massive, massive ecosystem where people have been earning income within a metaverse or within a play-to-earn type of environment. All of this information can form and should form part of their identity and part of the way they build relationships within the context of interacting with financial institutions and basically with any type of other digital ecosystems they become part of online. So one important thing to note about the on-chain and about the way our on-chain identity is being perceived that is currently not taken at all into consideration by financial institutions in the real world is exactly how can we piece together the information from our traditional identity, the identity that we have in various different dispersed ecosystems, and the identity that we've built by interacting with decentralized applications. And notably, our digital assets should very much be taken a look at in the same way in which our bank account statements is being taken into consideration. The way we have borrowed from decentralized finance applications, from DeFi protocols, should be equally as important, or at least part of the decisioning process in the way, in a very similar way as how we interacted with when borrowing from a more traditional financial institution. That's not my wallet, by the way, don't get excited. So one of the big promises and while talking about decentralized identity and centralized identity, one of the big promises is, of Web 3.0 is that it will allow and it will enable basically to rectify or to remedy some of the gaps that the Web 2.0 has in terms of particularly how we think about identity and how we think about the data that forms this identity. The biggest gap, arguably the biggest gap nowadays, relates to data sovereignty. And what this means in reality is who controls our data, who has access to it, under what circumstances this data can be used, and under what conditions it cannot be used, basically. All of these decisions are currently outside of consumers' control. They're dispersed within, they're up to the availability, basically, or up to the decisions of the enterprises that hold this information. This is not a bad thing. This is not something intentional. This is not big corporations or big tech companies or telco companies deciding to mine people's data and basically hold it and exploit it. It's a natural effect of how the internet and how our economies have evolved over the last 20, 25 years. Basically, these walled gardens have formed by companies that have built very important public infrastructure that allows us to stay connected, that allows us to communicate with each other on a day-to-day basis, and by building very important products and platforms that we are also using for several hours a day on our mobile phones. So the data sovereignty is the data sovereignty or the lack of data sovereignty is rather a byproduct of how the internet has evolved and not an intentionally bad thing that's happened. But now that the technology is available, being able to allow consumers at least the option, if not full control, but at least the option to exercise control on where their data is stored, how is it being used, by whom it is being used, for how long, for what type of period, and under what conditions, it's something extremely important, and one of the great promises of the Web 3.0 Web 3.0 technologies and of blockchain and decentralized or distributed ledger technologies in general. As a next step to this, of course, comes the identity portability, or the moment that we have control over our data and over how it's being used, it becomes relatively easier to think about how this identity can be ported when forming a new relationship with a new type of institution, or be it in the Web 2.0 or in the Web 3.0 world. And I'll give an example here. Everyone that has been shopping on Lazada, let's say, in the Philippines, should fairly easily be able to port or to transport their identity on Lazada when forming a new relationship with another e-commerce store, let's say with Amazon. This should be fairly easy. It doesn't exist in today's world, but with Web 3.0 technologies, that's something that is also going to become technologically available. Another very important shortcoming within the Web 2.0 world is when we talk about data privacy and data protection and data security in general. We've all witnessed multiple different hacks that are primarily a byproduct of centralization of data, and one of the ways and also of the way that this data is being shared across several different parties. If no anonymization and encryption solutions are being used, it becomes much easier for hackers or for anyone with malicious intent to exploit our data and to take advantage of it in a way that has not been intentionally designed. However, with decentralized and distributed ways of storing data, particularly sensitive data that forms part of our identities and that eventually is going to allow companies to make important decisions for us, it becomes much easier to share only the type of information that is necessary for the type of decisions that someone can make whenever we form a new relationship. For example, there is no need for me to send my passport and my ACR card every time that I open an account with with a digital website. The only thing that is important is to know that I'm of legal age, that my name matches actually the type of information that I've put there, that I'm a Filipino or non-Filipino citizen. All of this information should be fairly easily verifiable with the help of Web3 technologies. And naturally, as a next step of essentially having access over our own data, as well as being able to port this data, the logical next step would be that we'll also have a little bit more control on how this data is being monetized. And in certain cases, that may mean that we are okay with our data being monetized. In other cases, it may mean that we are actually active participants in a revenue sharing model with the enterprises that have build the necessary infrastructure that stores our information, and with ourselves as basically the data owners or the data subjects whose data is being used. So each of these gaps, essentially, of how the Web 2.0 world exists and how the Web 2.0 world operates today can be solved with the underlying technology that Web3 forms part of. And as a conclusion, I would like to point out some of today's existing real-world application of decentralized credit scoring in particular. Several of these are really, it's very interesting to point out that they are mainly focused on either using on-chain data from one ecosystem into another, in the form of, let's say, minting an NFT, what Creda and Rossify are doing, or the way that off-chain data, such as some of the solutions that FinScore have built, is being used in the on-chain world. We have not yet seen on-chain data being used in the traditional world, and I would argue that for any traditional financial institution, that should be a very, very important next step to take a look at. In conclusion, I'd just like to finalize with a piece of food for thought. If you control your data, you control how you're perceived. That means you're not born into an identity, but you rather create it. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Philippine Blockchain Week. See you next year.